Thanks, Jess. Okay. Tutawa mai iruna, tutawa mai irau, tutawa mai iroto, tutawa mai iwahu, kia tu ai po timari tu, timari ora, ki te katoa huie tatie. Okay, so our presenters today are Karen Snow, and who is here, and Elizabeth, who was having some technical difficulties and logged out, and we're still waiting for her to log back in again. So I will pass over to Beth to start the session. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Joanne. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. I guess for me, it's evening, and then it's morning for you all. So just one moment. Do you actually have, Joanne, do you have the meeting ID handy for this particular meeting? That's something that Beth is asking for, and I don't think I have that handy.
Yes, I will.
If you can put it in the chat, I can.
Yep.
Sorry about this. She's.
Hold on to the chat. I'll put the whole URL plus password there.
Okay.
So I think the meeting ID is the 84, but.
Okay, you think that's okay? I can give that a try. Sorry, once I really apologize, y'all.
Can you hear me now, please? I hope.
Oh, there you are. Okay, sorry.
Yay!
Oh my goodness. Okay, sorry. I was just trying to
Sorry.
type out the meeting ID for you. You got in. There you are.
I had this all like very organized to be very relaxed. That's not how it worked out.
Okay. Okay. Glad you could join. Okay, so we just gotten started. I haven't even shown my PowerPoint slides yet. Okay, so
Great.
all right. So I'm going to go ahead and show the slides. I'm going to share my screen. Thank you, everyone, for your patience.
Thank you
Okay.
for your patience. Apologies. Thank goodness.
All right. All right. Can everyone see my slides? Okay.
Yes, we can see them. Thank you.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you. So, all right. So Beth and I are here today representing the Cataloging Ethics Steering Committee, who will kind of explain more about that in just a moment. But here is our information. So I'm Karen Snow. I'm a professor in the School of Information Studies at Dominican University, which is just outside of Chicago in Illinois in the United States. And I have my email address here in case you want to get in contact with me. And then we also have Beth, if you want to introduce yourself.
Hi. So I am actually the fairly newly appointed head of bibliographic services at Victoria University in the University of Toronto. I picked up from Atlanta, Georgia a little over a month ago, and my family moved to Toronto. So this is my information with my new email address. So I love to get email at my new email address. So if anybody wants to contact me, that's great. I'd also like to start with the University of Toronto land acknowledgement. I want to acknowledge that the land on which the University of Toronto and me, where I am at home, have been for thousands of years the traditional lands of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and I am grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land and in this place.
All right. Thank you, Beth. Okay, so today we're going to discuss the Cataloging Code of Ethics and various other topics related to that. We do encourage you to please post any comments or questions you have in the chat along the way. We'll both be monitoring that because we really want this to be more of a conversation as opposed to us just talking at you this whole time. So please feel free to jump in at any point. But we will also have some time at the end of our presentation, which is not super long, for us to have that conversation as well. So, okay, so let's get started. Yeah. So first of all, like I said, the main topic of this presentation is the Cataloging Code of Ethics. And so for those of you all who have not looked at it, yet, I wanted to post a link in the chat to our Cataloging Ethics Steering Committee website that has a direct link to the Cataloging Code of Ethics there. And I'll also have like a direct link here soon. But if you go to that website, it'll say Cataloging Code of Ethics final version, January 2021. So just go ahead and click on that link and you can look at it.
Yeah.
So, and yeah, sorry, Beth, did you want to?
Yep, nope, I was gonna just drop that link in, but we don't have it up at the moment, so I will get it and drop that link in.
I thought I'd, just the direct link is great for to the Cataloging Code of Ethics document, but I also, as we'll talk about later, there's a bunch of other great stuff on our website that we feel you should check out as well. So, we wanted to first talk about, okay, so then, why? Like, why? What is the point of this? Why do we need a Cataloging Code of Ethics? So many reasons, in fact, and these, many ethical scenarios were on our minds when we decided that this is something that we wanted to pursue several years ago. And these are just a few things that you may have thought about or encountered. And such as, like the subject headings, right? Just kind of how some certain subject headings, whether you use Library of Congress subject heading or another control vocabulary list, may not always appropriately represent certain topics or groups of people, for example. So I have this, this screenshot from the website for the documentary Change the Subject. I don't know if anybody here has watched that documentary Change the Subject, which is freely available to watch, by the way, on this website. And I will, I'll try to post as many links as possible as we go along here. But I'll also will provide the PowerPoint, obviously, after this presentation for you all to have as well. But this is a direct link to the Dartmouth University's documentary on, trying to get, and then I guess eventually successfully getting the illegal aliens Library of Congress subject heading changed. So it was a very powerful documentary. So, and once again, also this in the upper right-hand corner, this article in American Libraries magazine regarding decolonizing the catalog, right? This discussion also of certain subject headings that, once again, that they're not, well representative of our people and so forth, and various concepts can be very offensive, in fact. And so I think we've all probably encountered that to a certain extent, but that's not the only thing, right? That we feel is kind of what we feel are ethical issues in cataloging in terms of the terminology that we use, the language that we use in the catalog. Also, you may have seen this discussion regarding including gender information in authority records using RDA, how that can also be difficult to determine and also, offensive, right, to authors, creators, if it's not accurate. So there has been quite a bit of discussion of that. So that's part of like descriptive cataloging. And then also in terms of classification systems, how just the hierarchies themselves, the actual structure of the classification systems don't lend themselves well to those who are marginalized, who are not tend to be part of kind of the majority groups, and they tend to be othered in these systems. So not just Dewey Decimal Classification, but other sort of organizational schemes as well. So we found that there are ethical issues that can be found across, right, the cataloging ecosystem, as we like to say. In fact, something that we learned a lot about as we went through this process of constructing a cataloging code of ethics is that ethical issues, like I said, are all around us in the cataloging world, quite literally, and that they impact, right? There's influences on us and the work that we do from many different spheres, not only like from within ourselves, right? Our own like moral compass and lived experiences influence what we do, our cataloging, the choices that we make, but our institutional policies and culture, for example, the users that we serve, the language that they use, how they access resources at our institution, the cataloging community of practice, right? We have certain standards that we use to catalog. So those also influence what we do, cataloging work, as well as even beyond that, right? External influences such as just our general culture, commercial entities, as well as laws, right? There are certain legal issues that arise when we're trying to catalog ethically, right? So this is, once again, when we're, like, as we did this work, we were thinking, like I said, not just about, you know, subject headings. We wanted to think about all the many influences that can impact our work and our ability to catalog ethically. So yeah, and so Catherine posted in the chat about the metadata best practice for trans and gender diverse resources. We're actually going to talk about that a little bit later, just like briefly. We're going to mention that because that particular resource mentions the cataloging code of ethics as well. So which we're very happy about. So thank you for bringing that up. Okay, so I'll let Beth take over now.
So a little bit of background just about how this sort of got going and who's involved in creating this code of ethics. So we formed a steering committee in 2018, and the effort sort of started in the US with a couple of presentations that happened at American Library Association conferences. One where I happened to present with Hope Olson, who you may be familiar. She's author of The Power to Name, which is sort of a seminal text, at least in North America, to read about cataloging. And then we had a roundtable event as well, and we'll talk about that a little bit more on the next slide. So the steering committee that was formed, so I sort of got thrown under the bus, as it were, by the committee that formed us, having written an article about it. And then Karen and I agreed to co-chair the steering committee. Also, May Chan from the University of Toronto, Canada. She's a manager, a metadata manager. Jane Daniels from Cardiff Metropolitan University in Wales, who is a cataloger on the ground, working with vendors and creating resource records. And I should mention that I am a rare materials person, and Karen is a LIS educator. As is so Sarah Ferger, who's a public library cataloger in Illinois, and Diane Pennington, who's at the University of Strathclyde in Scotland, who's also a LIS educator. Also, of course, I've, as you might notice, I have switched positions since we began. I began at Emory University, and now I'm at the University, Victoria University in Toronto. And Jane Daniels has since quite recently, about 6 months ago, also retired from her position, but she's still involved in our outreach and sort of public-facing work to get the code of ethics better known. Next slide. There we go. So our goal when we started was to create a code of ethics for catalogers through a collaborative and inclusive process. So we recognized very quickly that the six of us really didn't have the breadth of knowledge that was necessary to really create a code of ethics that was useful across the spectrum of catalogers and cataloging work. And so we formed the committee, the six of us, and then we actually put a call out for volunteers for working groups and had over 100 people volunteer. We had 6 working groups. Each one of those groups was liaison with somebody from the steering committee, or was somebody from the steering committee was a liaison for the group. And these groups did a lot of the legwork. It was amazing. They did literature reviews. They looked at presentations that had been given. They looked at their lived experiences and their experiences that they had in the cataloging world on a series of topics. And they wrote these wonderful reports for us that form the basis of the knowledge that we needed to get to be able to write this document. Most of the members on the working groups were from the US, the UK, and Canada, but we did have representation from other countries as well. And so then we drafted a code, and then we had a public commentary section. Well, it was open, I think, for 2 months, maybe 6 weeks, for the cataloging community to comment on. And we sent out, we posted on things like listservs and the Troublesome Catalogers group on Facebook, if you're familiar with that, and tried to get the word out. So after that first round of comments, we went back to the drawing board, did some wordsmithing, kind of rethought the direction of some of it. And then we had a second community feedback session. And then we also have presented several, we've done a webinar, and we've done several presentations to a variety of communities, mostly in the US, Canada, and the UK, in order to sort of make the code better known, and also to sort of get people's feeling about how it's useful, how they might see it in their own work, and how it might be useful for both being able to advocate for their departments as LIS educators and catalogers who are working in libraries and making records. So one of the things that we did is that we created, well, Karen, I have to give credit where credit's due. Karen pretty much created our website. So we had a kind of a home base for news and drafts. We have an extensive bibliography on the website. So if you're interested in doing more reading about cataloging ethics, there's quite a bit of information there, as well as a final draft of the Code of Ethics. Yeah, here's the full list. We have a great bibliography that's been contributed to by the working groups and a number of people just who are interested. We have information about translations that are ongoing, any updates, information about case studies, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And we have some presentation recordings from previous presentations that we've done, largely as a committee. So often when we present, we try to get 4 to 6 of us there to sort of provide different perspective. I think also because it's important that this was an international effort, that it wasn't, that we really tried to bring in to represent all of the communities that were involved. Okay. Okay. So the code is intentionally short. We have 10 points. And the idea was that it should inform and aid decision-making in cataloging. So we have an introduction that talks about our scope, which is to create systemic change. Catalogers require institutional support. We accept that every workplace is different, and responses to ethical situations are necessarily framed by those local contexts. So the introduction is longer, but that's sort of a good encapsulation of what we're trying to do. And we wanted to create a framework for approaching cataloging work that will be a useful tool for practitioners, employers, standards developers, vendors, students, and educators when ethical situations arise. Excuse me. And then we have 10 statements of ethical principles. This is not a checklist. This is not meant to be, it's meant to be a lens, so that as we go forward with cataloging work, as we go forward with teaching of cataloging, as we go forward with advocating for our departments and the work that we do within the library, or other place where we might be doing this work, whether that's for a vendor, whether that's for a corporation, etc., that we think about these things, that we sort of shift our lens a little bit to be considering these things as we work. We have happily been endorsed by ALA Core in November 2021. SILIP endorsed the code in March 2022. And CIFLA FCAB, which is the Canadian Federation of Libraries, is we're working on translating, which I can say we now, we're working on translating the code into French for the Francophone community. working on doing sort of a regional consultation exercise and doing some presentations about the code with folks that have been involved in Canada, but also folks that are just really interested, who are part of the Canadian community. And so the end thought is that they will be endorsed by CFLA, FCAB, but Canada has taken a slightly different approach. Rather than having a body just sort of endorse it and try and move down from there, they're trying to sort of grow a base and bring endorsement up from that end, from the bottom up rather than the top down. So which is interesting. Having moved to Canada, I get to be involved in that as I was involved in the ALA core endorsement. So it's kind of fun to get to do it from a different direction and to continue that work here in Canada.
And I'll just also add that and this was really meaningful for us to have these, like the US, the UK organizations, as main associations endorse the work we have done. But one thing that we have always tried to make very clear in this work is this is just the beginning, right? We don't really see this document as like, that's it, like we have solved the cataloging ethics problems with this framework. Here you go, you're welcome, right? No, we see this as kind of a starting point that other associations, like the Canadian, right, Federation of Library Associations, kind of maybe taking that work, our work, and then using it and adapting it, modifying it to their own use. And so that's why we're going to approach IFLA. We've already kind of sort of been tiptoeing into the IFLA sphere to see what we can do with them to try to get the word out about the document if they want to take it and run with it and so forth, so that other countries can kind of take this and do what they will with it. So that's one thing that we do. We'd like to get your thoughts on this is people coming from New Zealand, in terms of how you might want to either just kind of take this document as it is or maybe adapt it to your situation, your environment. So feel free to say anything you want about that in the chat at some point. It doesn't have to be now. So thank you. And I believe I'm taking over here, right? Okay. And so, in speaking of like community support, Catherine's already kind of pointed out in terms of the community support for this document already, and this has only been like a year and a half that it's been out, but it's already been translated into Greek, just unsolicited. In fact, someone translated into Greek and provided that for us, which is fantastic. But we've also had, like I said, other communities offer up, that they would like to make translations of the document. So, like, for example, a Portuguese translation, and then a French translation for the Francophone community in Canada. And so we very much encourage that if anyone wants to translate this into other languages, please, let us know. And we obviously we don't know all the languages, so we can't necessarily help with all the translations, but we more than happy to hear from you if you want to do that. So we can include it on the website. We did include the Greek translation on our website. Also, there's been published scholarly work using our code of ethics, the code of ethics, I should say, here with this particular project that I think is Illinois State cataloging practitioners use the cataloging code of ethics to essentially assess a project that they did to see kind of where they did what they did right in terms of ethical approaches to their work, and maybe what areas of improvement in that to be a bit more ethical in other areas. So they do have a preprint available, freely available on their website that you can check out if you want. Once again, I think I have, yeah, here we go. I have a link I can kind of post in chat here if you want to read that. And then, like mentioned, in addition to that, metadata best practices for trans and gender diverse resource from the Trans Metadata Collective. This just came out this year. Where they do mention the cataloging code of ethics is kind of they acknowledge it and it's kind of inspired their work. Same thing, it was mentioned in the OCLC's Reimagine Descriptive Workflows report as well that also came out this year. So we feel like our even though the document is fairly new, it's already having a pretty good impact on the cataloging community. We want to continue this impact. From the very beginning, we wanted to include case studies that we thought would be helpful for kind of thinking through different ethical scenarios that you may encounter, and have this as being a community resource. And in fact, we are planning to include it in the actual cataloging code of ethics itself, but over time we realized that it may be better just to have it as a separate resource apart from the actual document, that way it can be a bit more of a dynamic resource that can be added to over time more easily, as opposed to changing the actual code of ethics document. So we do encourage you to please add to this resource. Right now it's there's not much there, but we're trying to build there. So if you have encountered an ethical dilemma and you resolved it in a certain way that has been fruitful, right, that's worked for you and your institution, please let us know. We'd love to add your case to our growing body of case studies here. But all submissions are anonymized, by the way, just in case you were worried about being, that having your name out there. We anonymize them, and we just kind of include the scenario and kind of redact any names like institutions and anything that could identify you. So please feel free to check that out. That's on our website. Getting back to the actual document itself, the cataloging code of ethics, as Beth mentioned, it's divided into two parts. One, an introduction to the work, including definitions, and then there's a part two, right, that have the statements of ethical principles. Well, those were based upon these fundamental principles and values that we identified, that we list in part one. And as we went through our work, we found that these kept popping up over and over again, these ideas, and like, for example, access to resources and metadata, acknowledging bias, advocacy, etc., like in the working groups and in the scholarly literature. So we felt like we needed to make sure that all of our statements of ethical principles in some way capture these principles and values in cataloging work. So, and as you can see, like I said, it's not just about the language we use. We include, like, for example, education and training, which that may be controversial in terms of considering that to be an ethical issue, but that we just kept coming back to that again and again, the need for proper training and education and cataloging work as an ethical issue. So and so forth. So yeah, so those are the ones, like I said, coming back to, so those 9, but they don't necessarily translate directly into the statements of ethical principles, but they just kind of are there, kind of in the background of all of them. So as opposed to just kind of sitting here and just reading out the entirety of these statements of ethical principles, we thought, since equity, diversity, inclusion, so EDI or DEI, sometimes it's the acronym kind of changes. Sometimes there's justice included here. This is really huge right now. I mean, I'm assuming it's that way in New Zealand. I don't know for certain. I know in the United States and Canada, this is something that that's very important. It's kind of at the forefront of a lot of work that we're doing in libraries and academic institutions. So we thought that we would kind of tease out some of these statements of ethical principles that we felt like really emphasize EDI, and kind of look at these. And what I'd like for you to do is, if you could be thinking about how the cataloging code of ethics, so these 4 statements of ethical principles, as well as other statements we have in there, how they might inform your policy development or revision in areas related to EDI, assuming that's something that you're looking into at your institution, if you are kind of thinking of ways to incorporate that in those revisions. So so I'll just kind of, while you're thinking about that, and perhaps even typing something into chat about things you're doing at your institution to incorporate EDI, and how you could possibly use the Cataloging Code of Ethics to support those efforts. I'll just kind of read out these 4. Okay, so feel free to type away. The statement number 2 is we commit to describing resources without discrimination, whilst respecting the privacy and preferences of their associated agents. Statement 3 is we acknowledge that we bring our biases to the workplace. Therefore, we strive to overcome personal, institutional, and societal prejudices in our work. 4 is we recognize that interoperability and consistent application of standards help our users find and access materials. However, all standards are biased. We will approach them critically and advocate to make cataloging more inclusive. And then 8, we insist on diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace. We will promote education, training, equitable pay, and a fair work environment for everyone who catalogs so they can continue to support search and discovery. So, yeah, so do any of these kind of make you think of areas, perhaps like at your institution, your policies or procedures that you can kind of reevaluate in light of these statements?
Or if you have particular policies that are excellent examples, because those are out there for sure as well.
Yeah. In fact, can I show this now, Beth, and you can
Sure.
tell us about your former institution.
So this is from my former institution. And we, from a couple of efforts that were going on regarding also the Code of Ethics, which Emory has sort of embraced and is reevaluating policies and procedures based on the Code of Ethics. But one of the things that they have that we wrote when I was there and made public is a statement about harmful language in the library catalog. And so we have a statement about it, and sort of explaining that we're committed to inclusive metadata. And it sort of goes on to say we don't want hurtful language, and if you find it, even though we've done some remediation in the catalog, let us know. And there is an email address that goes to a person that's available at the bottom of the statement. And there is a little bit of explanation about things like we can't change titles. A title of a work, even if that has an offensive word, is still the title of the work. But that we can work to make our descriptions more equitable and to really hopefully engage the community in helping us make a better catalog and make an environment where they can find the resources they need in a way that is not harmful to them and doesn't name in ways that are offensive and hurtful. So we also, I worked in the Special Collections Library, and we also drafted a harmful language in finding aids statement, which the two were quite similar, to try and sort of work on both explaining, but also being open to criticism and feedback about those things, because we recognize that try as much as we like, we're going to make mistakes, and we can't be aware of everything that's happening in the catalog all the time, and especially legacy data. We know, I think we all know, can be messy in many ways. So we really wanted to at Emory make both a forum for feedback, but also to sort of talk about things that happen in the catalog. So I guess it's a little bit advocacy, but also asking for feedback and help in making the environment better for everybody.
Thank you, Beth. We have a comment from Rebecca. It's great to read number 3. Okay, about biases in the workplace and striving to overcome, prejudices.
That word neutral. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, the word neutral. Yeah.
I think it's interesting because that you also bring this up, Rebecca, because of course there was this whole, I feel like it's, kind of 5 to 7 years old now, talking about how we have to be neutral, catalogers are neutral. Well, no, we're not. You make this point perfectly, that we're people and we have lived experiences of our own, and we necessarily walk in the door with that. But with number 3, it's really, we really wanted to, first of all, acknowledge that we do bring these biases, but we're going to try and put them aside when we describe things, and that it's not just personal biases, right? Our institutions and our societies also have biases that are at work, often to work against the idea of equity, diversity, and inclusion. So yeah, we really wanted to acknowledge that it's not just personal biases, right? That our institutions and certainly our societies also influence us, and the idea that we can do our part to work against that as far as describing resources in our catalogs.
Yeah. Exactly. Which, I mean, it also brings to the point where, Beth, you mentioned earlier, in terms of what we said in the introduction, is that in each, culture, each society, institution, environment is going to be a little bit different in terms of the expectation and the biases that we see there. So that's why we want to be very clear that we don't always feel like, what makes sense ethically in one environment is going to be the exact same in a different one, right? That's why we insist on kind of looking at this as like a lens through which to view your work, as opposed to like a prescriptive, like Beth said, like a prescriptive checklist of like, okay, this is what, if we've done this, we're ethical, right? This is kind of something that we have to kind of keep these glasses on, or ethical cataloging ethics glasses on, to see how we can make change in our institutions, not just from ourselves, but yeah, all levels of the institution, if possible. So, and that's why I just wanted to point out, which Beth, feel free to jump in on this, but and I was actually just checking this like a few minutes ago, and there's a privacy issue with this website, which makes me so sad. The Cataloging Lab, if anybody's familiar with this website, but Violet Fox is the one. This is the creator. She's the creator of the Cataloging Lab. What I have on the slide here is just links to various statements that she's collected over time. This one, last updated just in August of 2022, of various libraries and archives statements on like harmful or offensive language and description and bias in cataloging, which is a great resource. Once again, if you're thinking of putting together a statement like this at your institution, if you don't have one, or you're thinking of revising it if you do. But yeah, it's just not, there's a privacy issue right now, but there's also other like great stuff on that website, like problem, Library of Congress subject headings. This is kind of a
so it was originally founded, if you're not familiar with it, to create a collaborative environment for submitting subject headings to the Library of Congress. So being certified, as you may know, to do name authorities is not, well, it's a lot, but it's not nearly as complicated as submitting a proposal for a new subject heading. So the idea originally was that the information that's necessary to put into the form to send to the Library of Congress could be crowdsourced, instead of like one person having to do all the research all the time. So there are sections that have just lists of problematic subject headings, and people can add to that list. And then there are it's always listed when something is changed. And then there's a whole section that are terms that people are working on to either add or to edit. So if you come across a Library of Congress subject heading that makes your skin crawl, and there are plenty, this is a really good place to go to see if it's on the list or add it to the list, and help get it changed. So it's really empowering, I think, for catalogers, because it can be quite lonely and daunting to do them by yourself.
Yeah. And so please check back when the website doesn't have issues that are privacy issues right now. I promise normally it does actually work and it's fine, but it's just kind of having issues right now. So sorry about that.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've never had a problem getting to it, so that's odd and new.
But it's a great little website. In fact, I use it like my advanced cataloging students that I teach. I have them, work with Violet and the cataloging lab to put in proposals to Library of Congress to get Library of Congress subject headings added or changed. And I've already had, let's see, four change through that, and perhaps more. We're still waiting on a few because sometimes the process takes a little while. But yeah, I've had several students get some changes and some additions to LCSH, just students, right? So you can do it. You can do it. Okay, yeah. So Denise confirming that, yeah. So yeah, just keep checking back. Yeah, I'm not quite sure what's going on there, but it's anyway. So just to kind of, like I said, we want to get a discussion going here. We still have some time. So now we've kind of given you kind of some background on the cataloging code of ethics and why we felt there's a need there and how we went about creating it. We'd love to get some of your thoughts on ethical dilemmas that you see in your work, right? And where do you see the value or challenges of having a cataloging code of ethics? So just whichever you'd like to answer, but please feel free to
So Catherine commented in the chat that she's been wondering how to negotiate the tension between following international standards that have many biases but enable our metadata to be shared more broadly, and describing resources in ways that are respectful, appropriate, and inclusive. The cataloging code of ethics and the resources shared are definitely tools to help. Okay. That is definitely a tension, and one thing that came up again and again when we were working on this document was that there are all these tensions. There's lots of places that disparate things rub up against each other in the cataloging world. And one thing that I try to do is try to use other vocabularies, and I realize this isn't available to everybody. Your library may have a hard policy that you will use X. You will use LC and the New Zealand vocabulary or whatever it might be. But I don't know if you're familiar. There's, for example, the Homosaurus thesaurus, which is great for all things LGBTQIA and any other initials you would like to include, which is also linked data ready. For example, if you work with rare materials at all, the RBMS vocabulary can be really helpful if you want to talk about what something is rather than the content. If you work with any kind of rare materials, you're probably acquainted with that already. And I'm sure I'm sure that there are probably more vocabularies that are available in New Zealand and maybe Australia that are appropriate for indigenous materials or other kinds of materials that show up in your libraries. So if you have the ability to do that or to bring that forward to a manager, I do think some of those other vocabularies can be really helpful. Oh, and the other one is the Getty, the art and architecture thesaurus, can be really helpful, and in strange ways, like you wouldn't think, well, I'm not, this isn't going to be a great one, but it is actually also linked data ready. So if you can sort of splash out into some different vocabularies, sometimes that can be really helpful to maintain interoperable data, but to be able to name and to label a little bit in a less biased manner.
Ooh.
Yeah, I know about this one. I haven't had time to go kind of spelunking in it, but I'm really interested.
Nice. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I hadn't heard of that. Thank you for sharing, Catherine.
Yeah, I know also there have been a lot of projects recently for the Library of Congress. So there's a really terrible subject heading called Indians of North America.
Yeah.
So there's been a lot of work, especially in the Pacific Northwest of the US and in Canada, to submit and revise headings so that actual indigenous groups and tribes are properly named, and some groups have proper names so that you can be very specific about who you're actually talking about. And these have largely been done in collaboration with indigenous communities, so that the naming conventions actually meet their standards, not a Western standard for naming. So yeah, I do know about the Maori metadata standard, but I didn't have time to have a look at it today, but I'm really curious.
Yeah, and Anne mentioned that, there's a dilemma of how to handle material in a collection by authors who have been discredited or convicted. I know, Beth, that you perhaps have some thoughts on this. I'm sure you've worked with plenty of collections at Emory where perhaps there's been some controversy related to authors, but I don't want to throw you under the bus here in terms of talking about it. And I can certainly talk about it too, but you have more, I guess, more practical experience.
Yeah, and of course there's also similar dilemmas. Actually, Karen has done some interesting scholarship about sorry, I just had a moment. It's after work day here, so but Karen can talk about, she's done some work with discredited biographies and where they show up in libraries. So that as first classification, and so Karen, put the link in the chat.
For my article?
Yeah, for your article about the.
Okay. Yeah, let me, hold on, I gotta find it. I'll find the citation. Hold on. I don't know if I have like a link to the actual article available, but I can put the.
So that's as far as authors who've been discredited and what happens to their biographies. Do they get reclassed, or do they get sort of left where they originally were classed? Yeah, it's if somebody's been convicted, that's a really intricate question, and I think it depends a lot on what kind of resources. Hello, it's my son. What kinds of resources you're talking about, and if this is kind of one-off, or if you have a collection. For example, Emory has a collection of artist books made by incarcerated people, and there's also some projects. There have been projects that, for example, collecting oral histories from people who are illegal immigrants in the United States. And of course, even though these people may be named, obviously you don't want to make a name authority, because that's a government entity for somebody who is in the country illegally. So yeah, there are definitely some dilemmas about creators, and I think sometimes the answer is just not to make a name authority, right? That they don't necessarily need to be known in that way, that they can be attached to the record, but maybe don't need to have like full identification in an authority record. But that depends a lot on sort of your institution and the kinds of collecting that maybe you're doing.
Yeah, and sometimes I just posted the citation for the article that I wrote. I guess, wow, it's been like 7 years now. And that's specific to false memoirs, right? Like Beth was saying, but there are ways for us to, we could add like a note to the record, as long as it's not, prejudicial, right? I mean, I think it's fine to include a note, but I mean, ultimately, if there's value, right, in accessing the material that you're talking about, Anne, like your institution, for example, you're collecting it for a reason, then you may want to keep it, but this kind of have some notes in the record to kind of make it clear kind of what the context is, what the situation is. But
and I've also done things for items in the collection when I was at Emory that had sexually explicit content. And if it was the bulk of the resource, I mean, it's not like a pulp novel that had a title that you could probably guess, but maybe something that had a title that you wouldn't guess, that I would put a Mark 500 note in the record just saying this resource contains sexually explicit material, because at Emory, everybody had access to the material in the reading room. And I just thought, gosh, how awful for somebody to think this is what they wanted and to open this resource in the reading room and encounter something that could A, be really triggering, but also B, just be terribly difficult for them to sort of encounter in a non-private situation. So I've definitely done something like that, mostly about sexually explicit material. Fortunately, in my current position, we don't have a lot of that, but Emory had both books and archival collections that contain sexually explicit material.
So really great comments and questions. Anything else you guys have encountered that you want to talk about? Any ethical dilemmas or areas where you think maybe the cataloging code of ethics will be helpful for you, right? To advocate for cataloging work or justify, cataloging work and so forth.
Or if you see places where the community in New Zealand might tweak it for it to be more, or add something to make it more applicable to the situation on the ground there.
Yeah, love to hear that. Not that you've necessarily studied the cataloging code of ethics in depth and know exactly where it can be tweaked or whatever, but I'm just curious if anything kind of pops into your mind as far as anything that's more specific to your cataloging environment.
As you're thinking, one really interesting thing that came up through one of our committee members was the need to really re-examine vendor contracts in an ethical lens, and to really hold vendors also to the same standards which we wish to hold our own library to. And we talked a lot about sort of the complications of that, certainly. But as this one of our UK representatives kept pointing out, is we spend a lot of money. Libraries spend tons of money with vendors to make shelf-ready books, to do authority processing on the back end, any number of things. And so if those vendors want our library dollars, then it sort of behooves them to examine their practices and to enter contracts with you that meet those ethical needs as well. So
which actually makes me think that, sorry, Beth, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say that it was something she kept bringing up, and I was really glad that that she was sort of full on behind that idea, because I do think it's really important that it's not, there's a whole ecosystem that's actually sort of external to the library, and needing to ask them to meet certain benchmarks as well.
Right. Which, I mean, it just reminds me, right, kind of looping back to what we were talking about before about, so not only holding, vendors accountable, but also our standards making. So back, with, I think, it was, Catherine mentioned about, that tension, right, between the standards and what we feel it should be, right? So it's not like, we need to hold the standards makers to account as well. We can't just be kind of blindly accepting whatever we give them. Part of like with the cataloging code of ethics, I don't think this is one of the ones that I had listed on that slide, but I do say, on number 5 in the cataloging code of ethics is we support efforts to make standards and tools financially, intellectually, and technologically accessible to all catalogers, and developed with evidence-based research and stakeholder inputs. Okay, because I think for too long, in my opinion, the standards makers, I'll just call out, Library of Congress, the RDA steering committee, not just them, they will, create and update these standards in a vacuum, and they need to be held more accountable. And so I think that's starting to definitely happen. I know we're seeing it with the Library of Congress now, especially with Library of Congress subject headings. There's been a lot of updates to offensive terminology that have been a long time coming. So it's I think the more of us who kind of demand that things change, then we may actually see some change. So I do encourage you to like I said, do what you can to hold those standards developers to account on this. So, yeah. Any other thoughts or questions?
Well, I certainly hope that maybe we have spurred a conversation, or the document has spurred some conversations in your workplaces and your consortiums. And not that Karen and I have answers or or even you know, anything necessarily that we can solve. Certainly you can contact us and we'll make the PowerPoint available. So yeah, absolutely contact us. We love, with case studies, we love to hear different, you know, to think about what different people encounter in the workplace and how that might be improved or changed based on ethics. Oh, people are commenting, yay.
Yeah, yeah, then Catherine's saying, I think it's such an important point. So I think the most important point and the hardest one is to build relationships with communities and enable communities to lead descriptive practices as opposed to just simply consultation. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it is difficult, but it needs to be done. if it's ethically, I think we believe that that needs to be done. So. Okay.
Yeah, Eva had a good comment.
Yeah.
I won't read the whole thing, but having professional best practice standards around language use can make it easier to argue against offensive language and running up against teaching staff with anti-PC mindsets. So that's the advocacy part that that is so important, to be able to have tools to talk to people who maybe have, I guess, anti-PC mindsets. That's a relatively kind way to put it.
All right. Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate you attending and talking with us today. And yeah, please feel free to keep in touch. As Beth said, just reach out and we'll get the PowerPoint sent out. So
well, thank you very much for the presentation. It was brilliant. It's certainly given us a lot to think about. Okay, so I'll just finish up with the karakia and find it. Ka whakaria aki te tapu ki runa a kia watia ai te ara kia turuki whakatara ai kia turuki whakataha ai homie huie taitie.